Hello. Today I have a special episode with Jared Sullivan, who wrote the book Valley So Low, One Lawyer's Fight for Justice in the Wake of America's Great Coal Catastrophe. Jared was a dream guest to have on because the book is about the Kingston, Tennessee Coal Ash Spill, which is the largest industrial disaster in U.S. history. Kingston's my hometown, so I'm incredibly thankful to Jared and the others in the book that fought on behalf of the workers to uncover what a shocking disaster this was. I found Jared's reporting to be extremely credible and fact-based, and it parallels with my own experiences of living in both Kingston and East Tennessee both before and after the spill. That said, I want to dot the I's and cross the T's and note that Jacobs Engineering and the Tennessee Valley Authority dispute some claims of the workers and in the book. As Jared writes in his book, quote, "This is a true story. All the people and events described in the pages that follow are real. Most of the material comes from court documents, from records I obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests, or from interviews I conducted with sources over a period of 5 years. Some of these sources requested anonymity. All quoted dialogue in the deposition, hearing, or trial scenes comes from official court transcripts or from audio recordings of the proceedings. Quoted dialogue in other sources was, in most cases, recalled to me by primary sources, and I reproduced it word for word. Jacobs Engineering and TVA dispute much of my reporting." Further information can be found in the notes section of Jared's book, recounting the response from Jacobs and TVA. I personally would highly recommend reading the book in full to get the entire context, as well as understand the stakes for both the workers and the United States in general, as environmental issues related to coal ash and nuclear waste are not, by any means, a solved problem. Okay, on to the interview.
As snow is falling, the movies flickering, I go in silver, watching their hair, wondering where fantasy ends and real begins. I know it's all pretense. Don't let this feeling end, 'cause somewhere in silver, truth starts to bend at trade movies, podcasts with friends.
Hello everyone, today I'm talking to Jared Sullivan, who is a writer and editor that has written for The Atlantic, The New Yorker, Time, and edited Men's Journal and Field and Stream. He's currently an editor for Wealth Simple magazine and its award-winning newsletter TLDR. His debut book, and the reason for the interview, is Valley So Low, One Lawyer's Fight for Justice in the Wake of America's Great Coal Catastrophe, about my hometown of Kingston, Tennessee, and the 2008 Kingston Coal Ash Spill, which I highly recommend. Jared, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
So how come, I guess my open question is, how is no one in prison for this disaster?
You started with the hard one. I was no one in prison. That's a good question.
Before we get into
I can tell you, I have emailed like the local district attorney there, the federal prosecutor. And I got no comment back. So that's a question I think you should direct towards the local attorney's office in the Knoxville area.
Yeah. So this is probably a good time. I mean, if you don't know the Kingston Coal Ash Spill, you might have known it from my channel. But we could, I can give you the overview from my standpoint. So I was in college at University of Puget Sound, Tacoma, Washington. I grew up in Kingston halfway. I moved there when I was 11, south of the River Kingston. Mm-hmm. And I went to Midway High School there, just to dox myself. And then I went to University of Puget Sound, Tacoma. I wanted to just, go out to a different part of the country and stuff. Sure. And I stayed over for Christmas break, and I believe it was December 22nd, 2008. I remember started hearing the next day or something, it was massive industrial spill or something, or big coal ash spill happened in Kingston. And I was like, that's crazy. And I didn't know how big it was. It seemed pretty big, and the size of it was just oh my God, that's huge. Just looking I knew where it was, and the landscape and everything. But I had no idea, I didn't end up going back until I guess the next summer, and just sort of driving around it. But I really was at a distance. And also it seemed all my friends in Tennessee or people I knew or whatever, they were more concerned because I think this was around the time that like Lane Kiffin left University of Tennessee for for
I
USC.
remember that.
So
Yeah.
so there was much more of like an uproar over that than like the coal ash spill, which I ended up just like that. It infuriated me. But then I didn't know, like I had like had it. I was like, man, um, I hope it's not too bad. But then like 10, 12 years later, went by, and I honestly, when I was in Tacoma, and then when I moved back, my family lived in Maryville. So I was just in Maryville, and I had no idea until I read Jared's article. I believe you wrote an article. Was it for Men's Journal or
That's
was it
correct. Yeah.
for? Yeah, on the coal ash spill, and then it's like so many workers had died. I think probably in 2018, 2019, was it like 40 or 50 at that
Yeah,
point?
it was approaching 50. Now it's like 50 plus. I haven't kept track in recent months, but yeah, it's a lot.
That's crazy. So the coal ash spill, and I'm sort of describing it from my end. So what happened with these workers? I guess to sort of bounce it to you, like what were the issues with them?
So what happened is on December 22nd, 2008, TVA, and that's Tennessee Valley Authority, a big federally owned power company, they had a 6-story tall, 84-acre mound of coal ash. And coal ash is this gritty, sandy stuff that's the kind of what's left over after you burn coal to produce electricity. Well, TVA had this power plant in Kingston, and it had this mound of coal ash had been accumulating over some 5 decades. And on that early that morning, December 22nd, 2008, it just collapsed. This big black sludge, this big mound collapsed. Black sludge spewed out over 300 acres, pouring into the Emory River and into the Clinch River, and it destroyed or damaged several dozen homes. It was right before Christmas, and TVA quickly had to they sent out folks to rescue the people trapped in their homes. But the real unfortunately, no one died in the initial collapse. But
Shockingly, based on the descriptions in your book, they were so evocative. I mean, it felt like the opening scene of I don't know if you watched Chernobyl, the
oh,
show,
sure,
but
yeah, I
like
did.
the episode 1 of that, like that's what it seemed like. You had deers like buried half in the coal ash, like homes floating, like
It was
crazy
wild.
stuff.
Yeah, I mean, this one woman I quote in the book, or I guess I cite her in the book. She came downstairs when she heard, because it was sound like an earthquake. When this big billion gallons of coal sludge was rushing across the landscape. It shook the terrain. This woman comes down to her house, and she sees is black sludge creeping under her front door, and starts filling up her sunroom. So of course she's terrified. And she was home alone. Her husband was away on business travel, so she was freaked. And a couple other neighbors jump out of bed and grab flashlights and basically just run towards this river of black. And all the power goes out instantly because this black wave pulls down power lines, and it throws fish onto the riverbank, and it's pulled cars away. There's this one home in particular that got really nailed by this big black wave. It got shoved against like an embankment and started falling in on itself. So it was like I describe in the book as like a biblical level spill, disaster. And it's really what it was. It's kind of, I would encourage anyone listening to, find the overhead helicopter footage on YouTube. It's really, really remarkable. And so it made national news, but this was a crazy time in American life. The financial markets were melting down. The housing market collapsed. People were very, very concerned. Barack Obama had won the presidency, but had not taken office yet. And so there's just a lot happening in the news. So the Kingston disaster it stayed in the news for a few days, but then people kind of quickly moved on. And a large part was because TVA, they have a lot of very talented public relations professionals who got in front of news cameras and said basically, like, yeah, this looks really bad, but based on what we know of this coal ash stuff, it poses no significant health threat to the public. And people kind of started to go, okay, like, TVA has a lot of built up goodwill from its work during the Great Depression to bring electricity to the Tennessee Valley. So, and it's a federal agency. So people are like, okay, like we'll take your word for it for now. So after the disaster, a lot of blue collar workers were desperate for work because the economy had just, hit the brakes basically. So union reps start working the phone, calling whoever is available to come to Kingston to start digging this stuff up and doing something with it, clearing these 300 plus acres. So 900 men and women from across the country descend on Kingston and start working track hose and scooping the stuff up and carrying it off. They load it on the trains and sent the trains to Alabama. And initially, and TVA said we're taking every step we can to protect these workers. At a public meeting, they told one woman, Betty Johnson, she's a native of the area, lives in the area, that her husband would have a Tyvek hazmat suit within a matter of weeks, and if he never got it.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of similar requests over the years from the workers to get dust masks because they just knew this stuff it was it was making them feel bad. They started coughing it up, and the intimidation got worse and worse and worse by one of TVA's contractors, Jacobs Engineering. So
Yeah. It's really it's really it's a body horror book. Because this starts out as like as like a movie horror. Like any of those sort of worst of like and most uncomfortable you've seen watching like a David Cronenberg movie or something. And like that is the feeling watching this book of just like the black sludge and then the black sludge that people would like end up coughing up, and just like it was really, I mean, I don't know. I honestly don't know how you finish the book. I can't imagine the experience of writing it, because the experience of reading it was both just so unbelievably, I hate to say it, but like grotesque, and like just the effects of like both the coal ash itself and just the way the effects it was having on people's bodies. But honestly, the most grotesque part about it was that was the lack of care by anybody in any position of authority for these, like, as you put it, these are people who are, if you've ever been to East Tennessee, like I have a lot of like complicated feelings about East Tennessee, because it is like, East Tennessee in general was one of the only places in the 2008 election to vote more Republican than the 2004. It's like a quirk of it. Like everywhere else went from more towards the Democrats. But East Tennessee was one of the very few places that went more for McCain than they even did Bush too. And so it's like part of, there's like you and the viewers heard about sort of like the great Appalachian shift of like, people who are sort of former Democratic voters now who largely go for Trump or the Republican Party.
sure.
But yeah, just the total lack of concern and care for anybody in any level of like federal government was so shocking to read. I mean, it shouldn't be shocking, but it is, like, as an East Tennessean who, like, it was just so utterly shocking, just like watching these people who were just the most like normal Americans. Like if you had to put them on a commercial, the two of the main characters in the book are Ansel and Janie Clark, who I think you got to know very well, right? Like they're probably the two workers that you follow the most. And it's like, if you had to, I talk about this with my dad a lot, or not with my dad, but about my dad. Like, one of the reasons I became kind of disillusioned with a lot of America and like the American dream or something is like, so my dad grew up, in a not so great family, and he grew up to become a like first in his family to go to college in the middle of Jersey City, and like he's near deaf, near blind, like he like went to, he's like he did really well academically and then went to school and then became a teacher. Teachers didn't pay enough, so he became a lawyer while raising like 3 kids. Like he was a great dad, love him to death. Is a great dad, I should say this. He is a great dad, like both my parents are. And when he was graduating law school, we found out that he had multiple sclerosis, like, as well, not to again dox him, but like through all that, like he eventually had to stop working, go on disability due to like a variety of conditions and unfortunate things that happen. And MS is a very strange disease. And through all that, it's like the experience of me growing up as a kid was like seeing like how much the healthcare system would screw him over. And also that like there was no sense of like care by any part of the government of like, here's someone who did basically everything right that you could ask for. Like, and I thought about that with Ansel Clark a lot.
Yeah.
Like there's so much of like, oh, we have, not to get too political, like, I mean, this is a very political story, but not to get like too crazy, like modern, like right now political, but you hear like, oh, there's people coming in our country or this, that, or the other. But like the care level is the same versus like those people against like, this was someone, Ansel Clark was someone, and his wife were someone who grew up, he served in the military, he like got a job, he raised a family, he hardworking American dream, and just no one cared about him.
Yeah,
and
it was really rough.
It was just so
him.
shocking.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like I mean, you said exactly right. He was just like he did everything right. Like he served the country in the military, came out, worked blue collar jobs his whole career, and through a lot of effort, he was not going to die rich, but he had a nice, comfortable home in the West Knoxville suburbs. His wife also worked; she was a housekeeper primarily, but then they were seen as expendable. Janie Clark, she refers to the workers as the expendables. And I feel like that's a pretty accurate description of how they were treated by TVA and its
Yeah.
chief safety contractor, Jacobs Engineering, which I should say, like, they dispute most of the allegations of the workers end of my book. They maintain they did nothing wrong, but I feel like the evidence is pretty clear, and a federal jury also agreed that they did not take the proper steps to uh, make sure these workers had adequate respiratory protection and safety gear. And as a result of that, the workers were exposed to this. So coal ash is full of arsenic and beryllium and silica and radium, just nasty, nasty stuff. So many of these workers inhaled it for years and years and years. And because of that, they either died, 50 of them are believed to have died, 50 plus of them, according to their lawyers. And I've seen the list and I've verified these people are in fact have passed and did work at the site, and
To put that in
and
perspective, not to interrupt, but that is there are more. I think I said in one of my videos there are more directly attributable deaths to this than Chernobyl, I believe. At least like according to the
maybe.
sources I find on like the actual Chernobyl thing, not many people maybe directly died as a result of the thing. Like obviously very bad effects over a large area, but in terms of like the direct effects of this spill, just to put it in comparison for people who might not have heard about it, like it's one of the worst events, industrial events in terms of casualties I can think of in American history, like more than 3 Mile Island, possibly even. And
Yeah, I mean, it's really, really
yeah,
tough. Like these cases, what I've learned, I'm not a lawyer by training, I'm a journalist. What I realized, these cases are also so hard to litigate because if you have ever smoked in your whole life, if you have ever worked on another, like if you ever worked at Y12 in Knoxville, which a lot of blue collar workers have, there's a lot of construction
mhm.
jobs. That's a federal site where they produce and do all sorts of nuclear weapons manufacturing.
It's where every nuclear bomb has stuff made like refined in Y12. Every one
Yes,
that we have in our arsenal comes from.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of construction jobs at Y12. So if you've ever, like I said, smoked cigarettes or worked at or Y12, even worked on like an asphalt paving crew, you know, the defense attorneys can try to argue, well, were your illnesses as a result of working at Kingston without a dust mask for a few years, or was it because of these other reasons? And Ansel's case, I feel like is particularly compelling because he was not a smoker. He we know lived a fairly like active lifestyle, but yeah, got like this really, really rare form of blood cancer, like pretty early in life. And many of the other workers' stories are similar. Um, but it is really hard to link your diseases to exposures, and that's what the whole book is about, right? Arguing
Hmm.
this lawyer, these workers start to get sick, and they approach this attorney in Knoxville by the name of Jim Scott, and he had worked some big cases, but he was not like a high powered personal injury attorney with a huge firm. It
Yeah.
was effectively a one man show with help from a part time secretary. And these workers came to him, and he's really the only person that believed them. And he
Yeah.
spent the next 10 years of his life and basically wrecked his life hauling
Yeah.
their case through federal court. And it was a brutal, brutal process for him, and also certainly for the workers, because this whole time they're getting sicker and sicker with respiratory issues and cancer and all sorts of things. So, um, but these cases are very, very tough to prove, and it's just the brutality of the system.
Yeah.
It's tough.
It was an insane. Looking back, I mean, no, it's interesting. Did you watch? Because I watched last night. One of the things in the book that Jared writes is that Jim Scott, right before going to trial, he watched like the John Travolta movie A Civil Action 15 times or
Yeah,
something.
yeah.
I think it was a
Which is
number.
funny because I actually love I read the book and I actually like ripped off the book in some respects. I took little tricks from it. The book is really phenomenal. The movie is
Mhm.
like okay at best.
Yeah.
It's okay. Big
I watched it
big
with my brother. Yeah. My brother was like, they tried to do so many things, and they like, I thought it was, well, I mean, it was like, I also thought like, what a crazy movie for this guy to watch, because like, it is basically the Jim Scott story of like John Travolta's character in it tries to sue this thing, is by points successful or unsuccessful. And then he loses all his money and like has his life ruined in many ways because of it, which is like kind of what happens to Jim Scott. It's just like,
Yeah.
yeah,
He sees
it was
himself as
fascinating to watch that for inspiration, I guess.
yeah, and Jim kind of saw himself in the I think it's Jan Schlickman is the name of the attorney in
Mhm.
civil action. Jim saw himself in a similar mold of like on a righteous cause. I get it. I do believe he was on a like had a righteous case to pursue. So but
Well,
it
that
nearly
is,
killed him though, but yeah.
yeah, that is the thing. So in contrast with the people no one cared about him, I like the thing that has really been, there's a couple things like really blackpilling about the book. And one is just like the way you do such a great job of contrasting. And I would imagine some of this, I don't know, you know, what's intentional or unintentional, but like the contrast of the workers who, generally speaking, are not too concerned about money. They're not like, this is not like, you know, I'm sure there's many of them in there who are like, we should get like, you know, be nice to have money in this, and
Yeah, yeah.
everybody feels that way. But by and large, like the workers were like, we want an apology. We want like an admittance of guilt that you guys sort of ruined our lives, and we want justice to be done. Jim Scott also too. It's like, this is like if you knew the outcome of it, and like, you know, if you were Jim Scott and you sort of knew the outcome of it, to embark on this quest that he does over 10-12 years is insane. Like it's actually insane. And it's also, it seems, to your point, the comparison with the civil action one, which is based on a true story of or at least the civil action book is a nonfiction about a true story, and the movie's based on it. It's also similar insane in that like, you, in order to like, I kept thinking about redress of like how like, what is the proper way to sort of redress these grievances if you're one of the workers? Because it's like, your choices are, you go through this like Kafka-esque labyrinthine, like you basically need an insane lawyer to say like, I'm going to fight this for 10 years in a way that makes almost no sense, because he kept having to dilute his take, so to speak, because he kept having to add more lawyers to it. Then eventually he had to pass off the case at some point, like when it got into like the two-part damages phase. Yeah, but aside from that, it's like, someone has to be looking at this. It can't just be that like these people were able to get sort of allegedly poisoned and just die and all this, and no one. So that's a big motivating factor for Jim Scott. And the contrast between that and like the complete abject source of irresponsibility on the part of TVA and Jacobs and everybody else just seemed like so, like, when I was talking about it with my buddy who also grew up in Kingston, he's like, it's crazy that like no real people are sort of involved in anything. Because I was telling him about the part at the end of like how Jacobs even tried to, and I don't know if they were successful, kick off like 40 people or so from the lawsuit because of a little known Tennessee pro-business law limiting damages because of silica, which is one of the constituent parts of coal ash. But like, I don't know, is that like something that really struck you as like, was that similarly just sort of like kind of depressing to sort of learn that like, I don't know, the gap between like your everyday people and like just all the people on the other side, they just did not seem to care. Like, how did you deal with that in sort of like over 5 years of writing the book, or 4 years of writing the book? That seems like it'd be incredibly depressing.
Yeah, no, it was definitely radicalized me in ways we can talk about if you want. But I mean, to me, the thing I was trying to underline with my book is like, you can have a great lawyer, and at least a good-hearted lawyer who's willing to throw his whole life at your case, in Jim Scott. And then in addition to Jim Scott, he later brought on some very, very talented attorneys. Not that, I mean, Jim's talented too, but very, let me say, experienced attorneys who had done similar cases like this.
Yeah.
So you have great lawyers on your side. You have great evidence. I think I'll lay out some of the very compelling evidence the workers had on their side that made very clear that they were intimidated and threatened on the job site, and to not wear dust masks. And you can have those things going for you, but still basically lose in the end, or walk away with a very, very, I'll just say like, not very substantial settlement, right? And that's what happens because the Jacobs Engineering and they're very skilled defense attorneys basically wore the workers down and forced them to capitulate. And And yeah, it's, I mean, it's a failure on the part of TVA, on government, TVA, and the EPA certainly, and it's a failure on the part of the lawmakers who represent that area. Like Chuck Fleischman knows about the disaster, right? But I
Bill Lee
reported,
too.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
they all, like, this is common, I mean, fairly well understood story in Tennessee now. But and Chuck Fleischman's, he's on the appropriations committee. He's one of the most powerful men in Washington. Like, he could set up a fund to help compensate these workers for their illnesses, and he has not taken that step. So I mean, it's really it's also, I gotta say, a failure of the people to keep electing people like Chuck Fleischman. Like
Yeah.
we do not in Tennessee, we don't have a great history of electing people who really are act in our interest once they're in Washington, and that goes back decades and centuries.
Yeah.
And so I think we as a
Yeah.
people like own this too. Like, Chuck Fleischman only has power because the people of Tennessee decided to give him power, and he decides to use that power not to benefit the people. But to me, the thing that what should happen in my view, and in my, I don't really, my opinion is not really in the book. I mean, you can probably draw some conclusions about how I think about all this from the book. I'm not a character in the book. I don't like opine about TVA and my thoughts about it. But uh, what I will say is that in the late 1990s, Bill Clinton and members of Congress, they created a fund for workers at Oak Ridge and other U.S. nuclear bomb sites,
Uh-huh.
that if you get one of a number of very, very rare cancers, you don't have to litigate against the Department of, I guess, Department of Energy to
Uh-huh.
get compensation for your illnesses. It's just assumed that your very rare cancer came from working near nuclear weapons at nuclear weapons sites. And I feel like that's what needs to happen with the Kingston workers. They should create a fund that's, and the DOE workers now, they have what's called white cards, and
Uh-huh.
it looks like an insurance card, and they take it to the doctors. It says like no copay, no deductible on the front of it, and the entity that's paying the bills is the United States government. And something similar, in my view, should be created for the Kingston workers. They stepped up in a moment of calamity in East
Uh-huh.
Tennessee and really sacrificed their well-being and their health for the benefit of their neighbors. And yes, they needed jobs, but they also felt like they were doing something of a public service or civic duty, and they wanted to do the right thing for their neighbors. So
Yeah.
some kind of fun, I think, would be like a great first step, because without, short of Congress at this point, it's hard to see how the workers could be made not whole again.
Well,
They'll never be made whole again, but something approximating
yeah, we need
wholeness.
like a John Stewart, the way he's like advocated, I guess, for the 9/11
Yeah,
workers.
that's a
Like,
good parallel. That's a good parallel.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, which you draw in the book, and I think one of the people, I think in the second part of the phase, might have testified once the later, like,
Oh yeah, when the
so
experts.
yeah, concerning like the air quality stuff that TVA and Jacobs were disputing. I wonder if they could be covered under the same sort of white card thing, because to get into it, that's something that, again, I didn't know when even I was growing up. Like, so when I was growing up, I did a video of like, there's a great, if you go to my East Tennessee playlist, viewers out there, you'll see some East Tennessee history that is insane. I think it's called Insane East Tennessee History, Insane
Mhm.
Appalachian History, because East Tennessee in particular, home of Cormac McCarthy, just it seems to be generationally cursed, especially with regards to
Uh,
like environmental catastrophes.
yeah.
Um,
Going back to Ducktown. I mean, going back hundreds of years. Yeah.
yeah, and there is a great article by, I think, someone from the magazine Grist. I can't remember the name, so apologies to you. But I think the title of it is like how the Kingston Coal Ash Spill unearthed a second nuclear nightmare.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about Y12 and the white card, like if you worked at Y12, you can get this card if you have like some medical issues doing stemming from it. One of the reason that possibly the coal ash spill was so, and this is where we get into like allegedly and et cetera,
Sure.
was so dangerous, which you go into a little bit in the book. One of the lawyers, like I think it was Roper,
Mhm.
really sort of looked into it, is that the Kingston Coal Ash spill, or the Kingston Coal Ash plant, the one that produced all this coal ash, was originally made in part to power Y12 in Oak Ridge in the service of nuclear bombs.
Mhm.
And Y12 is slightly upriver from Kingston, and Y12 has a history of insane dumping that I didn't even realize. Like, well, I grew up in South River, Kingston, which is like across the bridge in Kingston, closer to, like, down towards like Athens and Loudon and 10 Mile and all this. When we grew up, if you grew near the fish, like if you went, like, we're fishing anywhere in the lake, you'd see these like signs of these really horrified looking turtles or like horrified looking fish, that say basically don't eat the fish. Don't eat certain types of fish. You can eat like carp, like one time a month if you're pregnant. You can't eat catfish at all. You can't eat turtles at all. Interestingly, there's a racial component with this, where there's actually been studies that they put more signs up in white neighborhoods than black neighborhoods around Kingston. Like, this has actually been studied, so that in Kingston over like 30, 40 years, black families had higher rates of like mercury ingestion and stuff, and like PCB ingestion. So
you know about the radioactive test in Oak Ridge in like the 50s? It was black people, they went to local health clinics in Oak Ridge and they injected them with radioactive material to see how their bodies would respond. And Bill Clinton apologized for this in the 90s, like, publicly. It's a well-known documented thing. Yeah, there's a lot of racial disparities too, and the pollution.
100%.
And like just sidebars, like all the ash was taken from Kingston to this poor black town in Alabama. That's where it ended up being dumped after they hauled it away. So. But continue, yeah. I mean, the Oak Ridge connection is strong between the Kingston disaster and Oak Ridge.
Yeah, so we'd grow up, and then I joke about it with my buddy, because like he has a black humor. East Tennessee dark humor, Cormac McCarthy-ish humor, but we joke that, like, he should be glowing. And like I have a friend who, like, his dad, like her dad can't wear, like, wristwatches don't work because he grew up in like Oak Ridge or something. Like, it doesn't, like, like he breaks phones there's like stuff like that is like, I don't know how, sometimes I feel like she's putting me on a little bit, but definitely, like, I joked with my buddy, like, he didn't grow up with a lot of money, so like, people would bring his family, like people in the neighborhood sort of knew his family didn't have a lot of money, so they would catch a catfish and they would bring it to him, and he grew up eating lots of catfish from the lake. And if you look, you weren't supposed to eat catfish because of PCBs, but then they did studies in 2000, 2004 or something. 96% of the catfish in Watts Bar Lake were contaminated with mercury because over the course of the 40s to the 70s, with making uranium, Oak Ridge Y12 can't account for, I think it's like 2.1 million pounds of mercury they can't account for. And there's a crazy story of, like, they can't account for, like, lots of uranium, lots of cesium, like lots of anything else. There's a great article by the former nuclear secretary, assistant to Clinton, who went there, and like, this was back when they were keeping so much uranium and cesium and everything, and basically the same wooden shed that they had built in World War II. And this is actually, I did a whole video on this. There's a crazy story that while he was visiting Robert Alvarez, a plane flew over Oak Ridge, over Y12, and was dropping pornographic leaflets with revenge porn of like one of the workers. It was a Spurn guy at Y12, and I guess his wife worked there, and had, allegedly, whatever, some dispute.
Sure.
So he was dropping like revenge porn leaflets, and everyone at Y12 was laughing, and Alvarez got really freaked out because he's like, that's a wooden shed with like the country stockpile of uranium, and if that plane had like crashed into there and started a fire, it would have like caused like a disaster unprecedented in the history of the world. And so he's like, how, like, can this be a laughing matter? And so it, like, because of that, like, they had to, like, they started like
now
building.
a couple of years ago they built a new multi-billion-dollar warehouse, basically.
Super
duper warehouse.
And they talk about that, like, he's like, they had like depleted uranium, like, in hallways. They didn't know what was in any of the barrels. They lost documentation for all that. And then in the book, you talk about, like, stories people have of, like, they would take barrels out to the river and just like shoot them and then float them. So all this relates to the Kingston stuff is, as they were, like, possibly one of the reasons that for the viewers that this might be more contaminated. Even the more normal coal ash, which is itself very not good.
Yeah, toxic.
At these barrels were at the bottom of the river, and I think in the Grist article they talk about like barrels getting dredged up through this like dredger to try and dredge the coal ash in, and they just be ripped open.
I talk about this in the book too.
With white powder, and that is possibly cesium-137 or other stuff that is like just going on the workers. And I think they possibly, like, said it was dry diesel fuel or anything else. So were you, I guess, like, yeah, how did you know any of that, like, or was that like all sort of new to you in the course of reporting, like, sort of the history of Oak Ridge and how this might have like compounded a disaster might have compounded because of previous
Uh,
disasters.
I'm trying to think when I first learned about the contamination of bridge. I guess I was just astounded by like the level of documentation that was out there.
Uh-huh.
It's very, very well documented. The government acknowledges, including TVA and EPA and Fish and Wildlife, that there's a lot of radioactive material in the bottom of that river. Around Kingston, you can't build a dock without special permission because the risk is too high that you'll kick up radioactive material that's mixed in with the sand. They call them legacy contaminants in all the documents. It's so you have to kind of know what they're talking about. But
Hmm.
yeah, so like the workers allege, and I think credibly based on evidence that when this billion gallons of coal ash rushed out from the TVA plant, a lot of it ended up in Emery River and near the Clinch. It's kind of is at the confluence of these two rivers where this disaster happened. And yeah, they allege as they were sucking up, and well, I should say, I talk about this in the book that before work crews started sucking up, we call or dredging. I mean, it's basically they had these
Hmm.
big underwater vacuums. They were sucking up coal ash from the bottom of the river. Before they got started, members of Fish and Wildlife and other federal agencies and document were like, be careful about the legacy contaminants on the bottom of the river because we know they're there. And TVA, so we have no reason to think that we'll suck up contaminants, which is like there's no way they did not. There's no, I mean, in my view, like unless you're truly, truly slow. I mean, there was they knew they were going to suck up radioactive contaminants in the bottom of the river, and they did. Lo and behold, they released a
Yeah.
report in I believe 2009, 2010, where they said they experienced quote difficulties when they were dredging the river bottom, and they go on to explain as they hit unacceptably high levels of hot stuff in the river, radioactive sediments in the river. So
Yeah.
they had to suspend their dredging operations. I think they left. I mean, it was 700,000 tons of coal ash in the bottom of the river because it was too dangerous to dredge up. So it's definitely down
Yeah.
there. I mean, the hot stuff's definitely down there, and I think the workers I cite I think 4 or 5 of them who submitted statements in the court case, and they saw Geiger counters go off or they dredged up barrels. So and that just added to the level of pollution at the case that the workers that were exposed to rather.
Yeah, and in for a comparison, the Hanford site, the federal government has been more sort of willing to, I think, directly classify as a Superfund site, and I think the cost to that work to clean up the Hanford site, which is where we made the plutonium
Yeah,
for
sure.
the bombs in World War II, I believe, is going to cost $686 billion and is going to go until 2086, I believe, from
Oh,
when I
interesting.
sort of read it last. Which you could argue that I mean, we probably shouldn't keep that coal ash on the bottom of the Tennessee River and all the
Well,
cesium and
yeah, the
uranium.
Tennessee River, I feel like we've just accepted it as like an industrial sewer at this point, and we're just like whatever about it. I mean, it's yeah, it's a nasty river. I mean, we still allow. I mean, I went to school in Chattanooga. You wake up in the morning, you could still smell because overnight the factories they would dump stuff in the river. You wake up in the morning and smell, and the smell would dissipate as the sun came out. But
Yeah.
it's an industrial. We treat the river like an industrial sewer. It's really, 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 really unfortunate.
It's yeah, and there's such a I think you said earlier Ducktown. Is that so is that I don't know that I know that one. Is that like a
It's one of the
different
old. It's one of the oldest. Gosh, was it sulfide? It's one of
Okay.
the earliest industrial sites in Tennessee, and I believe Ducktown was almost completely abandoned. I forget what process they were doing. Something about releasing
Okay.
gaseous, some toxic gas. I can't remember if it was for iron
In
production, something.
Polk County.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
I didn't even know about that.
yeah, that's one of the more older examples of pollution in the area. But then we also have, and we said this in an email the other day. There's 2 nuclear sites, and one in Irwin, Tennessee, and one in Jonesboro, Tennessee,
It's,
where they make they get depleted uranium and they use it to make depleted uranium for like tank armor and munitions, but also for uh the same company, BWXT, they make all the what do you call it? The nuclear powered submarine engines or
mm,
whatever, right? It's
yeah.
nuclear powered subs. That's all done in East Tennessee too. So
Yeah, while we're recording this episode, there is currently a fight in Jonesboro because they're trying to build another BWXT thing to process depleted uranium. Jonesboro is about 2 hours, hour and a half away from Kingston, closer to Johnson City. But Jonesboro and Irwin especially, if you've seen my video on, I probably doubt, Jared, you've seen my video on Irwin.
I have not, but I'm familiar. I'm very familiar with the story, though.
It is the most, probably the most, and I say this like it's either Kingston or Irwin for the most cursed town in East Tennessee. It's like neck and neck for, because actually, so I had made a whole video about it. Like Irwin's a site where if you go on Wikipedia, you'll find that they hung an elephant, and that's what they were famous for in 1916.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, like from a crane, and then 2 years later they had the Irwin expulsion, I think of 1916 or 1918, where they booted every black person out of the town, and it became like a sundown town for
holy
years.
cow, I didn't know that either.
Yeah, it's really, there's actually, the East Tennessee Folklore Society has a great write up of the elephant stuff where they did in the 60s or 70s, where they talk about people who have memories of it, and they're talking about like, yeah, they were like wondering whether to mash the elephant between two trains or hook it up to the road.
Why what was their beef with the elephant? Why this poor elephant?
It had gored. It was like one of those traveling circuses, which is its own thing.
Okay.
I can a little local color. This is like the time is a full, like, I don't know if you ever read any Cormac McCarthy novels, East Tennessee,
sure.
like Child
I've
of
read them all,
God.
yeah. Oh yeah, I've read them all.
Okay. Child of God, I had to read about 2 pages at a time because basically everything that happened in that book was like there was a parallel between that and growing up in Kingston. The circus one he talks about in the book. Of like there's like the guy who like tries to fight the ape. There's like a traveling circus in East Tennessee where he tries to fight the ape, and it's like you can pay, like, if you survive 30 seconds you get like $5 or something, is like a passage in the book. Now that I had to put the book down because my teacher, who grew up in Oliver Springs, which is a little bit, I think it's like a little bit northwest of, same area of Roane County, Anderson County, he would tell us stories. He had such great stories. But there was a traveling circus in East Tennessee that would come around when he was in high school, and if you paid a nickel, you got to give a beer to a bear, and it would drink the beer. And he said, like, people lie. He's like, but you had to get there before 11 a.m. because by 11 a.m. the bear drank like 75 beers and would just be passed out. And so that was the bear's life, going from town to town in East Tennessee.
So depressing. What with the elephant? Someone fight the elephant? What happened to the elephant?
So the elephant, it was in a like one of these like fly-by-night circuses, and they had hired just some random drunk guy to basically be its trainer for the day, and he was prodding it in the tooth, and it apparently they found it had an infected tooth, and so it gored him to death. And so in front of the crowd demanded justice, and so they were like, okay, we'll hang it. And apparently elephant execution in the United States has a whole Wikipedia article where that was not an uncommon thing, where it sort of paralleled the sort of like lynchings and like executions of black people from like a,
go figure.
This is a really dark history.
Go figure.
Yeah. And so we did, like, in America from like 1850 to 1950, there's like 50 to 75 executions of elephants like in the United States. So this was one of the big ones. And what Irwin became known for. 100 years later, there was a shop for briefly called the Hanging Elephant Antique Shop that had that was like in Irwin doing it. Irwin also is the site of when Hurricane Helene happened. There was a new,
just last year, 2 years ago. Yeah.
Last year, 2 years ago. There was a company there that allegedly refused to let workers leave the factory under like threat of, you'll be fired. And so 6 workers died in the floods because like they were not allowed to leave work in Irwin, Tennessee. And so in the midst of all this, Irwin and like everything else, I watched the documentary You Gotta Move, which I highly recommend you would appreciate, as it's about the Highlander Center, which I never knew about growing up in East Tennessee. Maybe you did, but the birthplace of the civil rights movement.
Oh yeah,
like,
on
Rosa Parks was, where Rosa Parks was trained and everything else. One of the stories in the documentary is about Bumpus Cove in East Tennessee in Irwin. I found this out after my video, where, speaking of dumping, it's a very uplifting documentary, but in Irwin, outside of it, in Bumpus Cove, they had to have like a community. It was a community organized by these 2 women against industrial dumping in Irwin, because it became so, like, basically this guy from Irwin became like fuck, this is our state politics.
Mhm.
He became the state I think it's like the state hazardous waste commissioner or whatever. He went around shutting down every other hazardous waste place in Tennessee, and then quit his job and opened up a hazardous waste in Irwin, and then just said, all right, boys, give me all your chemicals from like everybody in Johnson City, and like I think like Eastman Kodak was there and all this other stuff. And so in the documentary there's these scenes of like they talk about all the fish are dead in the river, and like there's barrels of stuff floating down, and it's just the exact same thing as Kingston, just an hour and a half up. And then now 20 years after that documentary, after they successfully sort of organized to fight against it, now right down the road in Jonesboro, which is where one of the descendants of the people depicted in the movie lives, they're doing it again. They're trying to do BWXT. So it's just like a cyclical thing over here that like, and I even know about the Ducktown one that you'd pointed out. So
Yeah, there's a lot of
oh.
yeah, I mean,
So
I think this is on us again. Like we don't elect good people. Like this is I mean, I certainly blame the politicians, but like we
I think I end one of my videos like that. I'm like, I feel like everybody here should have universal health care, but none of them should be allowed to vote. Like no one in East Tennessee should be allowed
okay,
to
well,
vote.
one of my theories
Yeah.
is like why TVA is not controlled by people in Tennessee, because I don't think FDR trusted the people of Tennessee and out of the Tennessee Valley
Interesting.
to give them. I've never found evidence of this, but it's very the TVA is structured where people here don't have direct input. Even people who are on the congressional committees that oversee TVA, they're not all necessarily lawmakers from this region. Some of them are.
Mm-hmm.
Steve Cohn from Memphis is on the transportation subcommittee or something. So he,
Mm-hmm.
and he has a vested interest in caring what TVA does. But all sorts of senators have nothing to do with TVA, but they still weigh in on TVA issues. I think that's kind of by design because, I mean, imagine the lawmakers we would put on TVA's board if it was up for a vote. It'd be Marsha Blackburn duplicates up there, and and what's funny now is
Yeah.
that I've heard reported that Bill Haggerty wants to be the next CEO of TVA. So that's the president has a big say in that. So I think
It's
that's
a
why
high paying
he's
job. It's our
yeah, it's a
highest
high paying job.
highest paid federal employee, right? I believe.
Yeah. So I've heard he's he's not let's just say he's disinclined right now to be critical of the president, but also to be to look the other way on environmental issues right now. So
Did you get a sense, one of the confusing things about the book, I mean, this was also, so I'd worked in like tech industry, and like, I'd been like pretty left liberal or whatever before, but then like my experience working in tech industry for 10 years just only radicalized me further in terms of like just everything I believe politically. One of the weird things about it was just sort of the petty cruelty that so many people did at work, where it's like I expected it to go into tech and be like, oh, okay, everyone's making a lot of money, and they're specifically, I was like, okay, there's just going to be like really good capitalists. It's like they're going to make a lot of money, and that's their decisions are going to be made for that. One of the fascinating things that I don't understand about TVA was like, what did you get a sense like what was the motivation for the people at TVA and sort of the lower level people at Jacobs in doing everything that they did? Because like, I don't like TVA, as mentioned, is a quasi federal agency. It's not like they have stock. It's not like there's an evil cabal of capitalists who sort of run TVA the way you would run like, OpenAI or like any of these other things.
sure.
It's like, this is like, what I guess like did that confuse you? That really confused me, the book, of like the base level sort of like supervisors.
Why?
Yeah, like what is the motivation like
I
for
think it's
TVA to be doing this?
I think it's pretty clear. And I probably should have drawn this out a little more in the book. I think there's reason to think. Again, this is somewhat circumstantial, but I think the evidence is pretty clear. Like if TVA would have given the workers TVA or its contract would have given the workers dust mask or hazmat suits, that would have required under OSHA, federal safety rules, that they would have had to take breaks because Tennessee is, crazy hot in the summer, right? And we all know
Mhm.
from COVID how hot those dust masks get. So there's rules in place
Yeah.
where if you wear a hazmat suit or dust mask, you have to take mandatory breaks every so often, right? And for the Kingston workers, that would have meant they would have had to wear these big suits while working, which would have slowed them down just inherently because these things are, you know, limit your mobility somewhat. Then they would have take a shuttle bus, like leave the job site, take a shuttle bus to like a break area, derobe, have their break, get their gear back on, take a shuttle bus back to the site, and it would have just slowed up the whole process. Well, the EPA gave TVA very tight deadlines in which to clean up the site, and it would have, and if it went past those deadlines, it would have been fined hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, depending on how delayed the cleanup was. So the lawyers and I tend to agree that they think there was a conspiracy. Again, there's not like a smoking gun that says, and there's not an email that lays this out. But I think if you follow the money, it's pretty clear. TVA was like, we can't afford to spend this much time cleaning up the site. We have to like move fast, and that does come through in many emails and documents, just like the necessity to move quickly to get the coal ash moved up as possible. So I think it's really the threat of fines, but also when this disaster happened, the community around the site was incredibly upset, and they filed lawsuits against TVA for property damage. And I think the community was already so pissed already. I mean, but they would have, I think, even been more pissed if there was a bunch of workers stomping around the site in hazmat suits after TVA had come out and said right after the disaster, like, oh, the stuff poses no significant health risk. Don't worry about it. It just would have been even worse PR for TVA if that had happened. So I think it's some combination of
why do
those
the employees
two things.
care? Yeah, why do the employees care? That's the thing of like, I don't know. It's kind of like my dad's a defense lawyer, and if you're sort of the concept of the law, right? I do believe like everybody should have the right, obviously, to an attorney, defend themselves, whatever.
Sure,
I will say
sure.
one of the really diabolical characters, I believe, not shout out, but like, no offense to you, Sanders. I think Jimmy Sanders, the sort of the corporate lawyer for Jacobs Engineering.
Yeah, TVA safety
Also,
contractor.
I believe also defended the Exxon Valdez spill.
Yes, he does the sort, and he represented Ford in the Pinto cases before that. So he basically comes to the defense of these. Crazy run, like all timer. In terms of like defending huge huge corporations and messy lawsuits.
But also, as you point out in the book, he's from East Tennessee, and I believe, he is a Democrat. And he just sort of like totally sort of like splits up his thing is like, I'm a corporate lawyer, that's my job, and then privately I'm a Democrat. I can't square the idea of defending Ford, Exxon, and Jacobs Engineering with the idea of any type of being like sharing any type of political ideology that I would personally have as someone who also considers themselves like left liberal. Lord knows I have disappointments with the Democratic Party, but like, I guess the personal motivations, like the people at Jacobs and like the Sanders and like whatever, is it money? Is it career advancement? Like what? Like why would you, if you're like Tom Bach, who is a character in the thing, who's like the base level supervisor, who's like was the safety consultant over the site at TVA, I guess just like it was a motivation of like, oh, I want to make 150 grand instead of 100 grand. And like, I guess it's okay if 75 or 50 people and all these people get sick.
I don't.
Like,
as far as like the grunts on the ground, there's a guy named Tom, but I don't want to guess at his motivations. I mean, I think he was ambitious. Like I did talk to a TVA staffer who worked with Tom Bach and said Tom was very, very ambitious. So it could have just been, this is what the higher ups are telling me to do, so I'm gonna like follow through on it, and I really do think
orders.
I do think he was like kind of the fall guy for for the larger institutional failings.
And the lawyers I think you reported that they wanted to set him up as a villain, like that was a strategy on the part of defense lawyers too.
And I mean he did act cruelly towards the workers. But that's also a strategy that like you kind of make villains out of people in court if you're an effective like plaintiff's attorneys. But as far as like Jimmy Sanders going, again, I can't really guess it. Here's what I'll say. I talked to one attorney who worked closely with Sanders for many years, and he was in this same line of work. Was also like a big defense attorney, and when I got on the phone with him, he was like, "Don't villainize Jimmy Sanders. Everyone deserves the right to an attorney. This is how our system works. Our system works best when all sides are represented." I was like, sure. I mean, I believe that to be true too. I believe everyone has a right to an attorney and the right to good defense, but also you don't have to make your living exclusively defending Exxon and and
Yeah.
those some of the largest polluters in the country. I mean, that's just my view. Again, I know, attorneys, they represent both sides a lot of times, and that's just how it goes. But I would feel very. Let's just say I can speak for myself. I would feel very conflicted if that's how I made my whole career was defending Exxon's and these big polluters.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, that was the thing. And have you seen the movie The Insider, the Michael Mann,
oh gosh,
with Al
yes,
Pacino?
the tobacco one.
Uh,
Oh yeah. 60
yeah, the
Minutes, the
tobacco one.
tobacco lawsuits. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a good
great
movie.
movie.
That
Yeah,
movie
I
holds up.
like
I
it.
watched that a couple years ago. That movie holds up.
Yeah, it's really, it's really. I was surprised at how much I enjoyed it, given it's kind of a little bit outside of like what I would think of Michael Mann for filmically. But one of the things I thought was interesting in there was there's a scene where Al Pacino, I believe, is talking to his producer or someone else, where he's talking about like we were radical, sort of like leftists in the '60s or like whatever,
Mhm.
and like our way to sort of fight for the people was like we're going to do it through media, and that was like some of the mission of sort of 60 Minutes of like let's try and bring truth and justice to this, and so it can
Sure.
do political pressure and all that. And then it's like CBS is trying to spike it for very probably similar reasons of like just trying to defend their sort of corporate. I think they wanted a merger at the time.
Uh,
Funny how there are parallels between that and sort of like modern day
yeah,
stuff,
like
like
that
with
just happened again. Like
yeah,
however
with just
30
yeah,
years later.
yeah. Um, but the thing of like, I guess like the thing that it sort of left me with was like, I don't between this and also recently researching like how some of the eugenics stuff in America and Appalachia got started, and like some of the court cases they used to sort of like sanctify the eugenics, a lot of the American eugenics movement in advance of the Supreme Court. I'm like, I was like, it just is like, I don't know. It's like, this sounds almost naive, but it's like, I guess I lost a lot of respect for the legal system and the law as a place where people can sort of redress the government in a way. Like, did you find yourself like through this book being like, well, like, it almost seemed to me like the parts of me that are sort of like liberal as opposed to leftist of like, we need these strong institutions and we need this, and it's important to have the rule of the law in the country and everything. Like everything, the process you outline in the book does not seem sustainable. And it actually made me kind of scared in a way, because like, if that's the experience, and like, if more people knew that this was sort of the experience of someone like literally poisoned you or your husband to death, it's
Mhm.
like, I don't know how many more people aren't getting so like incredibly radicalized, almost even like if you're trying to redress against something, like if your options are this process is outlined in the book, or you can go get a gun or something. And I'm not advocating for that at all, but like, I guess it's like, I don't know. It's like it made me nervous for like thinking that like, if there's no sort of political way to redress your grievances, and there's not like really a great legal way to redress your grievances, it made me like kind of concerned as like sort of the fabric of civil society. And I'm kind of curious about like, having spent 5 years with it, like, I don't know, your view of American institutions coming out and like the legal system coming out of this case.
I mean, yeah. I mean, it's. I don't know where to begin. Yeah. Like if you're
Sorry for like a big
no, if you're like a
crazy,
poor
yeah.
white person or just a poor person in general, like it's hard. First of all, I'm a white collar worker. I will never have to make these decisions likely, So there's
Yeah.
like from the get go, I will never be exposed to, in all likelihood, these sorts of chemicals where I have to make these decisions and maybe risk, time and money and effort to seek justice through the courts. But also, like I have resources like a lot of other, if you're well off, you have resources where you can fight this. You also have know-how
Hmm.
because of education where you can seek remedies. If you're media savvy, and that's a huge there's power in being media savvy. If you're of a certain milieu, you know how to get stories written about you, and that can help your case. But yeah, I mean, there's no secret that in the United States, there's like a two-tier justice system: people that have money and those who don't. I think I mean, the unfortunate thing about with these toxic exposure suits are particularly difficult because we don't really like regulate, especially now under the Trump administration, but really ever we don't really regulate stuff on the front end. We just like we let people get sick and then we let them litigate through the courts.
Hmm.
And these toxic exposure suits are so complicated because, like I said earlier in the conversation, it's hard to know whether your sickness was directly linked to your exposure and all this stuff. And it's really, really hard science and really hard to prove. Um, so these cases in particular, I think, are particularly daunting. Where I think the legal system does handle certain other cases much more speedily and effectively than they handle toxic exposure suits, which are particularly thorny. That's why I think it's if we had government that represented us effectively, we'd have lawmakers who would step in and create funds or at least overhaul the justice system to expedite these sorts of cases. Um,
Mhm.
and we also have had like Bill Frist is from Tennessee. He was Senate Majority Leader, and he was comes from a family of doctors. And he at the RNC in gosh 2000 or 2001, he got to have this whole spiel about how personal injury attorneys like Jim are ambulance chasers, and and got all
Mm.
these states to pass what was called tort reform, including Tennessee, that made it harder for average people to sue for toxic exposure suits. You mentioned the silica law earlier. That was passed during what was called tort reform. Intended to push
Mm.
back against too many lawsuits by ambulance chasers. But no, the reality is, I mean, I'm sure there are some ambulance chasers out there, but a lot of these personal injury attorneys in reality are like the lawyers I write about in the book,
Mhm.
where they are representing small time clients. They people who have legitimate illnesses or grievances. They don't these the way these attorneys work. They work on contingency fees, so it's in their interest to take cases that are legit and winnable, because if they don't win or get a settlement, they walk away with nothing, right? So these attorneys are not, in based on studies I read, generally are not pushing ahead totally bunk cases. There
Mhm.
is usually, because it's not in their interest to, because they'll get thrown out in many instances. So, but we've people like Bill Frist have like poisoned the minds of Americans that think that people who sue are they made it harder to sue, first of all, with tort reform, but they've also like poisoned people's minds to think, oh, if these personal injury attorneys are bad, they're all money grubbers, yada yada yada. But I don't really think that's I don't think research bears that out.
Are there any like political solutions to that? Like, it almost made me think of like just systems wise, like there should be like I don't know if it's like an ombudsman or like, trusting your like hoping to find someone who's like sort of crazy enough to do what Jim Scott did, as like someone who's been sort of harmed, like seems like a bad way to do things in America. So I don't like, are there political solutions to this of like having like I'm thinking, like FDR's second Bill of Rights, right? To go back to even to the FDR like thing, like I don't know, like the right to, it's like we have guaranteed representation through a public defender.
Mhm.
But even in Tennessee, that's like, I don't know if you've ever, the public defender situation, like some of those people are handling like 350, 400 felonies a year, which is
Yeah.
crazy
Um,
because
I'm
there's no funding for it.
yeah, so I'm not like a policy expert, but what I think would be like a pretty easy fix. Well, first of all, Tennessee caps damages in a lot of cases at $700,000 for like
Hmm.
a loss of life case. And so if you're a big company, the max you're gonna have to pay for a case because of state law is $700,000. Well, that's not that much money necessarily if you're a huge multi-million dollar corporation. So they can do the math and say, if all these people get sick, oh, we could like cover all of this. If like
Yeah,
worst case,
Jacobs took 12 years to pay out, and it was 12% of a yearly profit, I believe
oh,
it
so
was, or something
yeah,
like 20.
something. I mean, very very small, like 750.
Yeah,
How much?
I think it was like
75 and a
688
half.
million, maybe. Yeah, they like,
$75.5 million. I should
yeah,
know this. I haven't talked about my book in a minute.
it was like 10 to 15% probably, or something, of their yearly profits to settle this lawsuit after 15 years.
Yeah, and it worked out.
Yeah.
The workers just got a couple $100,000 each on average, and
Which they didn't even. So I'm sorry to interrupt here, but like
less than
the
that
part where I
probably.
really, the part where I really like, I honestly like, I had to like take an ice pack on my freezer and put it on my forehead last night learning about this, because like, um, a lot. So if the people, they each won, I think like a couple 100,000, but like out of that 225,000 or whatever it ended up being for a lot of the workers, they had to pay medical costs that health insurance companies had paid over the course of their treatment. So I was just trying to do the math in my head. When I had a colonoscopy, not to get too personal, a couple years ago for the viewers, like I looked at my insurance statement, it said your insurance company paid $68,000 for this or something like
Yeah.
that. So I'm imagining someone with like rare bone cancer, and like, did many of these people get anything after that? It seems like that would be chewed through if you had like a serious health like condition.
Yeah, that's a good question. And with Ansel's it was a little more cut and dry because he'd already passed away, unfortunately. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure. I need to follow up the work to see how much they had to pay back to their insurance companies, because they did have to do that under Tennessee law. because when you settle a lawsuit like that, you're saying the blame for your illness falls, on this company, not on. It's not something your insurance should have to pick up. But again, that's a policy decision we've made to have laws that.
That's maybe the craziest part, like even past the dumping, past everything else, the craziest part, just like with the abuse of the health insurance industry generally in America and how shitty our healthcare system is, to have that final insult to these workers after 12 years was like, just appalling on like, I'm so furious just learning. I'm sorry to interrupt your thing.
No,
but yeah.
no. The whole thing is infuriating, and it just underscored to me like these cases are really unwinnable if if you're a sick person in a case like this. Um,
Yeah.
it's a grueling process, and it's not really set up. I mean, I feel like we have created a system where everyone, we want to give people the right to defense, right? But then company like Jacobs Engineering, they have effectively infinite dollars to drag a case like this out as long as possible. And that time is a weapon. They dragged the cases out, and eventually, the worker got so sick where they had to capitulate to get whatever they could. And that's very, very similar to what other big companies do in these sorts of cases all the time. But I feel like a very quick fix would be like not fix, but a step in the right direction would be to hire more judges to handle these cases, but also hold them to
Mm.
deadlines to move these cases through. Jacobs appealed to the Sixth Circuit twice, and that every time you delay, I mean, every time you appeal, like you might as well just tack on at least another year, a year and a half to a case, and that's a very
Mhm.
fast. That's a very easy, fast way to delay a case. So, make making a system where the cases are heard more quickly, and that would be a huge step. But even special courts, like these are highly, highly technical cases. I think we should have like special toxic exposure courts um,
Yeah.
that
I
deal with
can't
this
think of
stuff.
it's so sad that I can't think of like something that is like probably 50th on people's radars in the country, that the entire, like, on one hand you'd have like an entire corporate structure, probably every corporation in the country would not want that, and then there's not really probably anybody besides like you and a couple and like these workers who are like screaming for it, like on the other side. It's just so
Uh,
unfortunate, like,
yeah, I
I don't
mean
know.
that's why we should get money out of politics because we've disincentivized our politicians from acting in the benefit of the people. So
It struck me as like a thing of like a I mean, to go back to the lack of responsibility stuff. Are there any cases of these environmental disasters where people are actually like, well, how come the federal government isn't prosecuting anyone involved in it? Like, because it was also a question that Jamie Satterfield, shout out Jamie, this is another real shout out,
yeah,
longtime
she's
reporter
great.
for the Knoxville News
Yeah, she's
Sentinel.
great.
She lost her job in the course of this because she spoke out against, and this is another reason you should read the book, viewers, but like, they took this coal ash and they built a children's playground on top,
Yeah,
like, uh, uh,
I know.
which Jamie Satterfield got so upset about, and kids are kicking up coal ash and playing in it now, still, I believe, right?
Yeah, Bull Run. Yeah, there's a Bull Run playground. I know they should it'd be a civic duty if someone made little signs, ordered them off the internet and stuck them around that said "Caution, beware of coal ash." Yeah, yeah. Why there were, why is it?
Are
It's a
there any
federal
cases that
site,
you,
so like
yeah.
a federal prosecutor would have to go after members of Jacobs and TVA for what happened, and of course, and prove the threshold for civil cases is a lot lower than it is for a criminal
It's a
case.
preponderance as opposed to like beyond a reasonable doubt, right?
Yeah, exactly. So
Preponderance is like on the balance of it, I believe.
yeah, so with civil cases, I think it's like be 51% sure basically that they did it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for criminal cases, it's 80 or more percent sure that someone did it. And I guess I can't speak for the prosecutors in the Knoxville area why they have not looked into it. Lack of political appetite. I have no idea. It
Yeah,
seems worth it to me, but yeah, I don't know.
it really is. At the end of the book, I noticed a lot writing wise your anger coming through, and I also noticed a little bit. It seemed like a little bit of depression. Not saying you're depressed or whatever, but like it seemed like the sort of book, like kind of like towards the end, like there's a lot of you're not a character in it, as you mentioned, but like
Yeah.
the anger and like there's a lot of like just like sort of deep depression that sort of comes through in like the last chapter or two. I noticed. But also one of the things I thought you was interesting you included is like um the only people who sort of like Jacob, like on the sort of suing side, who I'm not saying they got off well in this, but like the lawyers who did this, like they are now able to, like, once the sort of the lawyers won, I think the lawyers between expenses and fees split like 26 million or something, which is like standard for
A third. It's like a third. Yeah.
yeah, a third for for personal injury cases of these type. But they finally got to walk away, and there was a big sense of relief reading about like the Jim Scott like stuff where like
Yeah.
he had these health issues, marriage breaking down, but now he's like sort of like at a certain point he's just like, I gotta like, he almost missed like his large parts of his kid's childhood in a way
Yeah,
that's
he
like
did.
really agonizing to read about. But he at least gets to sort of step away from it at the end. And like I think Janie Clark, one of the main sort of characters in the book, who's the wife of Ansel Clark, one of the workers, she continued to sort of it sort of ends with her sort of getting radicalized and doing it. Did you have any sense of that yourself as someone covering this, of like once it's sort of over, like did you have any sort of guilt about, like, just curious, like as a journalist covering this, like I get to now sort of like place this story down a little bit, kind of like in a way that like you are one of the people who's sort of fighting in sort of public perception on behalf of these workers. But even you mentioned the point about being sort of white collar. Like I think about that too. It's like I'll make a video about it, but I don't gotta like live without my husband of 47 years like Janie Clark does. So
Yeah.
just curious, like, yeah, how
Um,
was that reporting wise for you?
yeah. I mean, no, it was a really hard 5 years for to report. I mean, just it was a big story that was heavy at times. Like I remember, I mean, I'll never forget where I was when I got the call that Ansel uh had passed out on his floor. I was grocery shopping,
Hmm.
and yeah, I got to know Ansel, pretty well over 3 years, I guess, of interviews. Pretty and staying in regular contact with him. And
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, I went to the funeral. I didn't write about that in the book, but I went to the ceremony. I mean, yeah, it was incredibly agonizing, and it was hard. I took a year off of work or between jobs to write and report, but a lot of it was also done on nights and weekends, when I had my normal job, and I was having kids too. I had 2 kids while reporting, so there's also, like, a lot of life pressures that made writing and reporting the book very, very difficult. I'm But to your point, like, I'm a little reticent to talk about, like, the strain on me, and there was significant strain on me, but it's hard, but, like, I didn't lose a family member. Like, my life gets to kinda go
Yeah,
on, whereas, for Janie's life, she, lost a spouse, and that's true for dozens of other families, so I'm definitely in a position of privilege, but, uh, I hope I use my position of privilege as a, educated person that has upward mobility and can has a skill in writing and reporting, that I can use that to you know uh reveal some hard truths about what happened in my state. And
sure.
I don't have grand illusions of it influencing a lot of policy, but I guess in my mind, at least, there's like a record, though I know will always
Yeah,
be a record out there. I love a good magazine story. I worked and I certainly love a good newspaper article. I'm a journalist, but I also know it's the way our news ecosystem is right now. Stuff gets churned through pretty fast. It falls out, but a book will be on the library shelf for a long time. So at least there's a document of it. And who knows, maybe someone there's a young I like to think maybe there's a young attorney or young judge out there who will read it and take something away from it. So, uh,
certainly made an impact on me, I gotta say. And I mean, I'm as a Kingston resident who, I don't have any direct connections to the workers, but I mean, it happened 5 miles away from where I grew up, like in my house, and like we had a view overlooking the river,
oh
like where I
wow,
grew up in Kingston.
yeah,
And yeah,
a couple of schools have, like, from the Knoxville area have reached out to me to do live events. I've always, uh, even at expense for myself, like, driven to Knoxville to talk to students, because I do feel like it's obviously like a Knoxville, East Tennessee story, and if I would love if it could be. I think the Kingston story should be remembered there specifically, and I hope it has an impact on there. But I will say, like, my, you know, I live in hope that the South can be reformed. Like there is a cascade of bad decisions, of bad policies, decisions that contributed to this disaster. And it wasn't just on the part of TVA. You know, the EPA shares in the response. The president, multiple presidents share some blame, and
I'm kind of
this
curious where the union was in all this.
the
Like,
union. I mean,
not to,
yeah,
yeah.
that's another good point. There's a lot of like shared blame in all of this, and I'm I I was the paraphrase of William Faulkner. Quote from him in a letter one time, and he was saying, you know, the problem is that in the South, it's easier us to fear things we can see, be it black skin. I mean, he mentioned black skin, but insert immigrants or insert whatever. It's easier us to fear things that we can see than to believe in principles we can't see, like justice and freedom and uh, democracy. And I feel like that was when he wrote those words and continues to be true of the South. You know, we Southerners, we get fearful of things we can't see instead of pushing for freedom and justice and all these things for our neighbors, which to me is very, very unfortunate about. And I would like to see that change one day because the South has a lot of potential. We have a lot of great people here, beautiful landscapes, but it's a shame that we don't push for our government to be better in many ways, and we settle for very, very craven, self-interested politicians again and again, and we keep them in office forever. So it's a real unfortunate thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's the sort of core Gothic horror of East Tennessee. I think my buddy and I who grew up there, like there's a predilection. We love environmental horror, and like just because of the experience of growing up in East Tennessee, like I think it is because of that invisibility, like the invisible horror, which the original Gothic horror. I mean, the Gothic horror. It's darkly apropos that radiation is like sort of the thing that East Tennessee in general struggles with because it is by nature the invisible, the thing that you can't see that we would be especially susceptible to. I think metaphorically speaking, given that Faulkner quote. But well, Jared, thank you so much.
Yes.
I thank you so much for writing the book. Thank you so much for coming on the show and talking to me.
Yes, it was a delight.
And,
I really appreciate it, Jeff. It was a good time. Thank
absolutely.
you for being such a close reader and taking such good notes. I really appreciate the thoughtful questions. So
yeah, it'll be a while before I read it again for sure.
yeah, I don't blame you.
But that doesn't mean you shouldn't read it out there.
Yeah.
Everyone needs to know this story because it's the I don't know, it's the American Chernobyl in my mind. So it's such a fascinating book. And especially even if you just like legal thrillers, even if you just want like a legal thriller, some of the reviews of that said that, and I totally agree. It's like just fascinating on that perspective. So thank you so much.
Yeah,
and,
thank you, Jeff.
See you, everyone.